and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and with me, as always, is my co-host, our Chief of Research, Derek Cohen. Derek, do you have your Christmas list all done? You've done all your Christmas shopping, and everybody's ready to go?
Yeah, well, it's about as done as it's going to be, I guess. We also have Hanukkah coming up at the end of the month, which is actually going to bleed into next year. So next year, double Hanukkah year.
All right. Well, hopefully you took advantage of Cyber Monday and all those good things. I'm only making that joke because I want to bring in our guest now for the actual hot take, so we can talk about some fun stuff at the front. Our guest today is Brad Johnson. He's a senior reporter at the Texan. We're good friends with those guys, and they do a great job of reporting on the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. So this is our annual end of year show where we like to talk about all of the various things that happen throughout the year, and we've got various categories we're going to go through, and we love to bring Brad in. He's a good friend of the show to talk about what he thinks is the most important stories of the year. So thanks, Brad, for being here.
Yeah, I mean, we're starting a tradition now. It's the second year in a row, right?
That's right.
You got to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to bring in the hot take right here at the top because I have two Michigan football fans. Plot twist, you're also from Ohio. And so we saw this story that Ohio State Rep Josh Williams has introduced the O.H.I.O. Sportsmanship Act. This act would make it a felony offense to plant a flag in the center of Ohio Stadium. Is this legitimate or overreach?
Ohio State is never beating the soft allegations after this. It's just not going to happen. 4 years in a row now. Best 4 years of my life, I can say. Growing up, first game I remember, I think, was 2003. Then we didn't win another game against Ohio State until 11, and then didn't win again until 21. So it's been awful.
Is this regulatory overreach? Are there property rights issues here with regulating what can and can't be planted in the middle of a football stadium?
Well, you know how they can say you can kill the man but not the idea. I think Michigan's been planting flags in the middle of Ohio Stadium for at least the last 4 years. And I think that the big takeaway from this is not so much that this gentleman filed it. It's that let baby have his bottle. Let baby have his bottle. I think they should pass this and felonize that.
The Big 12, wow. SEC schedule came out yesterday. Texas is officially playing Ohio State in the first game of next year, to which I would suggest that maybe we change our uniforms to reflect maybe the blue and maize to scare them as they come into.
That would be a pretty sick uniform, though, you have to admit.
But yeah, obviously this is a dumb issue. It actually happened a lot with because that whole week was rivalry week, and so you had a lot of people running around trying to plant flags because there was a lot of upsets, or road upsets.
Well, Sark stopped them from doing it.
That's right.
At Kyle Field, right?
Ryan Day, not so much.
He just stood there like he'd just been through a war zone.
Oh man, we can talk. We can talk the whole show about college football and the year that was, and we've always threatened to have a sports show. Like we've always talked about wanting to do a sports show and talk about Texas sports or whatever. Although
Pat McAfee in here, that'll be great.
we considering the categories that we're going to run through today, there may be some sports talk because it's not just politics and policy that's on the table as we review the year. All right, so my favorite part of the show, of course, is the shameless plug. So if you're not following our weekly newsletter, it's called The Post. You can sign up at texaspolicy.com/The Post. It's got a lot of cool Texas stuff in it. It's obviously all the things that TPPF is working on, and there's always some fun cultural Texas stuff. So if you're not following that, you should. And also our YouTube page. You can just find us, just search TPPF on YouTube, and you can find our YouTube page. We made, I think, something like 236 videos this year. Jefferson will be putting that into his request for a raise this year. But we did almost 240 videos at TPPF, and they're getting a lot of really good engagement. We've been looking at some of the numbers through the year. So if you're not following that, or if you're listening to this podcast through Apple Music or others, definitely go to our YouTube page and check out those videos there. All right, now let's get into the show and talk about the year in general. Just before we get into categories, maybe we'll start with you, Brad. Just general thoughts on the year. It was a presidential election year, but no session, which is always very interesting in Texas. That we sort of thrive on the session years, and there's so much going on. But this was obviously a very big year. It was a change election, all of that. Your thoughts on sort of politics and policy over the year?
Well, I remember saying something along the lines of the last one we did on this. How can it get crazier?
Why would you put that out there?
I don't know if it got quite as crazy as 23 did, for Texas politics, but it got pretty dang close. And the primary, the runoff, both bloody, bruising battles, and we had the kind of wave election for Republicans in the general. It was just nuts all the way through. And are we just going to be? Is it that all the way down from now on? Like, maybe we're just going to top it.
Well, with Trump back in the White House, of course,
Yeah.
and there's nothing the media loves to talk about more than Trump. And so, here we go. We're going to be on the roller coaster. Derek, your thoughts on the year?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to echo Brad's take on it being crazy. Now, I don't know. I think it was differently crazy than 23.
Sure.
Maybe more
Yeah.
on certain domains than others. But I think the biggest takeaway from 24 is, and I will get into the big wins and losses and all that as we go on. But I think that so much of the received wisdom of what we had to work with when we discussed things like that had just been absolutely thrown out the window, good and bad. And I think that what we have going forward is, again, a new normal of not normal. So, which again could be, there's some normal things that are bad and then some not normal things that are good. So, we'll see where that redounds.
And the latter would be the Detroit Lions winning the Super Bowl, which would just, keep pushing
knock on wood right now.
in the craziest possible way.
Spin in your chair.
All right. Well, let's get into some of our categories. Let's start with the biggest wins or the biggest winners. And I might have the privilege to go first, but I won't do that. I'll start with our guest. Tell us your biggest winner for the year.
I mean, the top one has to be Donald Trump. I mean, the absolute wave that he ushered in across the entire country. He won the popular vote. Nobody thought that was going to happen.
What's it? How many years has it been since Bush?
That was 04, right?
Yeah,
so
04.
However many
Bush
years
04.
that was.
Yeah.
20 years. Jeez.
We don't do math in public.
Yeah,
here.
right. No.
I'm
That's
a
why I have
comms
a
guy.
calculator
I'm
on
supposed
my
to.
desk, right? No, I mean, it was clear, and there was a lot of talk about this election in Texas setting Democrats up to have their own kind of wave in 26 if the environment was correct, or even maybe that with Ted Cruz on the ballot that they could replicate 2018, and Trump just blew it out of the water. It was not going to happen. We saw the gains in South Texas. Starr County flipped, and Webb County flipped for the first time in 100 years. And so, we'll see if Republicans can continue to build on that, but it has to be Donald Trump as the biggest winner.
I want to pick your brain on something real quick. Just that notion that the left has. I mean, is that every year they always write the same stories. The media always writes the same stories. There's always somebody that they puff up as like this is going to be the savior for the party in Texas, and yet not only does it not remotely materialize, they don't make any progress. I mean, in 2 years ago, all of the statewide won by double digits, and then you have this idea that the Texas is turning blue. It's not a red state. It's a non-voting state, and we just need to get out the vote. I've talked about on the show millions of dollars that George Soros pumped into a strategy and into counties here in Texas to try to get out the vote, and yet it never materialized. Nothing ever happened. Do you think that
it lost ground?
Right, it lost ground. I mean, are they just are they just BSing when they say that, or do you think that there's like a legitimate a thought that like we're doing the right thing, we're moving in the right direction, and it's just a matter of time before I mean, do you think they really believe their own BS maybe sometimes?
Well, hope springs eternal, right?
Sure, okay.
Every election provides some potential opportunities if things break their way to make some gains, and they're constantly trying to replicate that 2018 race. I think they put a lot of their chips on the abortion issue, and if you look at polling, they were on the side of the majority of voters. It just wasn't the motivator they thought it was.
Yeah.
Instead, you had these other issues like the biological males and female sports issue. That was a big one, but also just the economy. And was it Carlin? No, whoever his name is, the bald guy, Democratic strategist, who said it's the economy, stupid, right?
Yeah.
I think ultimately we go back to that.
Carville.
Yeah,
Carville.
James
That's
Carville,
right.
yeah.
Not Dan Carlin.
George Carlin? He also had some political opinions.
So, yeah, I mean, it came down to that. You had an incumbent Democrat in the White House who was not popular. And, I mean, it just breaks that way.
Yeah.
Midterm, or the party in power in the White House usually gets a walloping to some degree. That's just how American voters are.
I had Trump for my biggest win. I had Trump too, obviously, but my spin on it, my angle was the gains that happened in South Texas, particularly with Hispanic voters. Again, we'll recap stuff we've talked about before. You had Hispanic men across in Texas. You had Hispanic men going for Trump, whereas before it was kind of 50-50. Maybe it was leaning more left. Now you had actually Hispanic men +9 towards Trump, and so like that is, that's that is a majority. That's a significant majority. And even among Hispanic women, you had essentially it's now 50-50. I think it was -2 overall, but essentially it's moving to 50-50. And that has been going on since Trump ran in 2016. We ran through the numbers, kind of this is progress. It's not like something that just reverted back to Biden in 2020. This is something that's been moving this direction for a while. And so the biggest winner there is the work, I think, that his campaign did, maybe conservatives and maybe the Republican Party on that side has done to attract Hispanic voters, and taking advantage of the opportunities of how far left the left has gone on these gender modification issues and the woke and all of that, really taking advantage of that and going out to these communities and saying, hey, you may not have grown up Republican, but your Democratic Party is no longer the Democratic Party that you had 20 years ago.
If I can add one thing on
sure.
that, the Trump campaign itself did not have the footprint it did in 20 down in South Texas. They were there all the time. The RNC was there. They didn't have that because they were focusing on the actual swing states, right? And they still got this anyway.
Yeah.
It's amazing to watch.
Yeah. All right, your winner.
I'd have to say my winner, and since y'all obviously took the low-hanging fruit,
yeah, obviously,
is actually probably the Middle East. I think that the fact that we effectively have deterrence restored in the Middle East now is, something that we haven't had since, and you can debate the shades of gray on this, but Bush or before, right? And, this is also, despite the actual foreign policy apparatus at Foggy Bottom, I think. And I think that what we're going to see from this, when Trump came in 17 and started work on the Abraham Accords, obviously that had a peace dividend going forward, undoing a lot of the damage the Obama administration had done. Of course, a lot of that was then, I wouldn't say undone, but at least undermined by some of the ways that Biden decided to approach the Middle East. But that being said, we now have a defanged Iran. We now have a lot of their proxies on the back foot, if not wholly eliminated. And we basically have Russia out of there trying to, after the Syrian collapse, trying to make that a sphere of influence for them. And I think that all those taken in tandem means that, the average Middle Easterner is now going to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I'm not saying that, it's democracy shall reign overnight, but it's a lot better to have any sort of government where you can exercise self-determination without that kind of oppressive regime on top.
How does, I'm assuming you mean Israel and all that too, how does October 7th play into that? Is that are you saying like the response to what happened last year is now?
And absolutely, and us doing this show last year would not have had the perspective that we'd be able to have on that. Simply because, when Hamas decided to engage, they saw, because again, I don't know if you remember this, and not to get super dark about this, but remember, Israel was close to a social collapse prior to October 7th because of how much judiciary reform was tearing apart the country. They had, there was all talk of, military members not even showing up to work. And then October 7th happened. Not only did it galvanize that particular question, but then it provoked a response. And while the Biden administration was trying to slow roll a lot of the support for that response and, drawing their own red lines and whatnot, they basically, whether it was unilaterally, I shouldn't say it was unilateral on Israel, because I remember the first time that Iran had that attack with all the cruise missiles back on Israel, that was joined by UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. If you would have told me that Saudi Arabia and Jordan would be coming to Israel's defense in 2024, I would have said you're insane. but that's what I'm saying, though, is that we now have deterrence in the Middle East, or at least a much more present deterrent apparatus in the Middle East than we'd have for years, if not decades.
Man, Derek, changing things up, talking foreign policy here on a show about Texas politics. I love it. All right. Any thoughts on that?
I have no thoughts on that. It sounded great.
All right. So I won't say the next category is losers, because my colleague Sherry Sylvester has her winners and losers column that she does, which you can also subscribe to. So I'll just say the biggest disappointment this year, Brad, but you can interpret that however you want. Who do you have for your biggest disappointment?
I'm kind of going to rehash a little bit what we just talked about, but the Democratic enthusiasm, came in indicating that there was a lot of potential here on the abortion issue especially, and there just wasn't. And part of that is their inability to persuade middle-of-the-road voters that they need to flip their way and not towards the Republicans. They put everything into abortion. It just did not pay off for them. And this is a big problem, not just for this year for them, but they're trying to set the table, not just for 26 to have some gains, potentially trying to flip that Senate seat if that's something, if they bring in a good candidate, but building for the 2031 redistricting. And they need to make some gains before then so that they're within striking distance to have a decent say in how the lines are drawn in 2031. And if you talk to the Democratic operatives who understand that, that's what they're working towards. But without that, they're just going to be jumping from election to election, just throwing everything at the wall, seeing what sticks, and so far nothing's sticking.
Right,
very Lucy in the football.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
hope is not a strategy, right?
No.
And that's what it feels like. I mean, there are three numbers that great on this point. There are three numbers that jumped out to me that were available before the election that really jumped out. That I think, like, if you're a Democratic strategist and you're not on MSNBC trying to pitch your stuff to the public, if you're like having a real conversation with the higher ups, in the Kamala campaign, how do you ignore these three numbers? The first one is 80% of the public was dissatisfied with the direction of the country for like 2 years straight. I mean, Gallup poll, it varied between 75 and 80% of the entire public. That's not a red hat, blue hat thing. That is, you've got Democrats in there, you've got a lot of independents in there, high majorities of that saying they're unhappy with the direction of the country. So that's one. Number two, the abortion issue, while Democrats were united behind that issue, only 7 to 10% said that it was the number one issue or the most important issue for them. And so you're already saying to them, well, we're going to highlight this issue and we're not going to talk about the thing that you care about most. And then the third thing was this issue, the second issue they had other than abortion was a threat to democracy, right? That Trump was so outside the norms that he was actually going to tear up the Constitution, institute authoritarianism, and had all this. You look at the exit polls after the election, on the question of who is a bigger threat to democracy, Trump voter or more people who thought that was a concern voted for Trump than did Kamala Harris. And so going in, they knew all of this, and yet they executed this strategy anyway. It's just like really head scratching. And I don't know if y'all listened to the podcast with the senior campaign officials, but to some degree, I think to spare their own integrity and future job prospects, they had to acknowledge a little bit of that. But there was still a lot of like, but Trump is bad, and there was still a lot of that in there.
They're just trying to make fetch happen, and it's just not going to happen.
7 days.
Okay, all right, Derek, let's go to you. Biggest, disappointment.
My biggest this is actually a recent one because I think there's two of them. The biggest disappointment, I think, is the way a sizable chunk of society reacted to the two stories coming out of New York, in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the first being the assassination of the UnitedHealth CEO, and the other being the Daniel Penny acquittal.
I thought you were going to say Peanut the Squirrel.
A third.
I was about to say there's some wounds that have not yet healed, Brad. But thanks for bringing that up.
If we had more time, I would. But
we have a standalone show. We are, what do you call it? Right idea in depth.
There we go
on that. But I mean seriously, not about Peanut, but I mean that seriously is that especially when it came to the somebody getting gunned down in the street, and you can have views on the American healthcare apparatus that are scathing indictments of its leadership, and that's fine. I'd probably disagree with you. I'd probably also question, if the capitalists weren't in charge, what do you think your healthcare would look like? Oh, you only need to go to the National Health Service or look north of the border in our what's soon to be our 51st state, if I understand President Trump correctly. But this glee, this mirth that people had, at somebody's assassination. Political violence should never be acceptable.
Right.
And then the other one, of course, on the Daniel Penny side, that fact that this case was even brought in the first place was heinous. But even so, when he was acquitted, you would have thought that Charles Manson just got out, and it was simply, it was about as slam dunk a case of self-defense or defense of others as you can get. but it was then obviously racially polarized. And I'm not saying I would never accuse elected official Alvin Bragg of sullying the gears of the justice system with personal motivations. Never. Heaven forfend. But I think that it's just another example of the fact that nobody's thinking of these institutions and these various levers of, social life in the ways that we used to. And for that, I find that being the biggest disappointment.
Yeah, I would hate for things to become the new norm. I mean, we have, just people for policy reasons, right? It's not like, I wouldn't understand. I certainly wouldn't condone. But you would at least, if you had some connection to a decision that this person made that hurt his mother or family or wife or something like that, you could understand the rage that someone would feel to do that. But this was like for policy reasons, this guy did this. And then the same thing with, the new norm of trying to assassinate presidential candidates or candidates, in general. I mean, that's very much a black hole or a rabbit hole we don't want to go down.
Podcast we were talking about probably in April or May at the Texan, and I brought up the point that we haven't seen a lot of assassination attempts or assassinations to begin with in a long time. It's just the country had moved away from that. In the 70s, that was all over the place. 60s and 70s, obviously. Now we're back there, and it's pretty alarming.
60s and 70s were. Now we weren't there.
No,
Brian, I can't speak for, but we weren't there.
Their tail end.
Yeah, but that being said, I understand they weren't great.
Yeah, right. All right, so to move to a little more lighthearted, my biggest disappointment this year, to keep it with the sports theme, is the Dallas Cowboys. And for now, I've got two reasons why they're the biggest disappointment. First of all, just the failure of them to not win in the first place, right? And so they have this horrible record. I think they were like 3-6 or 3-9 or 3-5 or 3-7 a few weeks ago. And so obviously the season's over. They're not going to get in the playoffs. They're certainly not going to win the Super Bowl. But then, and so you're thinking, well, great. At least maybe they'll maybe the Dak's over and we're going to go get a quarterback. But then they turn it around, and with a backup quarterback, they start winning games. So now they're not even going to have a top 10 pick, and so they're probably not going to get one of these quarterbacks coming out and change the team.
Y'all are inventing new ways to lose, though. Like, Will Levis level comedy coming out of there. Like, I've never seen a team lose by blocking a punt.
Right, exactly.
Or by not putting drapes over the windows. What the heck?
Freak accident. But it's it's kind of like, Pittsburgh deals with this too, right? Because they win just enough games every year to kind of get in the playoffs, so they don't ever fire their coach, but they never get a good enough spot in the
third in the
draft.
NFC right now. So.
Well, no, but but traditionally, right? This year they're actually doing pretty well. But again, it just goes back to they can't get over the hump, and they're never going to get.
But they're also just a well-run organization.
Yeah, unlike the Dallas
Cowboys.
Yeah, that dang GM up there. Anyway, so my biggest disappointment is the Cowboys, because obviously the season was over, but then even when the season was over, they started winning again, so now they're even more of a disappointment.
So I'm guessing your Texan of the year is not going to be.
I'm not going to be Jerry Jones, unfortunately. I guess I won't get my season tickets re-upped. I'm just kidding. I would never pay for that. All right. Well, they lost like 9 straight home games. Like, who's even going to these games anymore? Like, what's going on?
If you still look at the ticket prices, they're still out the roof.
It's
insane.
Yeah, well, he's a good marketer. I will respect that. All right, so I will start with what I thought is the biggest story of the year. And we've already mentioned it this year, is the primary. Just the primary itself here in Texas specifically, not obviously the national primary, but the primary here, and the lead up to it, and everything that happened last year with session going the way it is, and then Governor Abbott obviously being very vocal and saying, look, I went and met with people and I said, look, we can either do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way, and I think that that not only did it prove, I think which has been lacking, frankly, in Texas, is you've always get some people from the far right or the grassroots saying, oh, we're going to come after you and take your seats, but then Greg Abbott got involved, and then it actually happened. It actually you actually see that. I think that's creating like just a completely different dynamic. And you guys have been watching Texas politics even longer than I have. I think it creates a dynamic that we haven't seen in a long time, where now it's real. It can happen. Like if people aren't, supportive of certain, legislation or certain policies, that there's a real apparatus that will say, look, well, then we need to go find a candidate who will be supportive of those things. So that really changes things, not just for the policy for the session next year, but also for the foreseeable future in terms of Texas politics. And so I think that, to me, is not just what happened specifically with that election and the 16 members that got, that either retired or lost their seats, but what that really means and the significance of it going forward for Texas politics. Derek?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's one of those life comes at you fast moments where one day you're an elected representative, next year just clawing for column inches in the Dallas Morning News, poking back at things inside baseball things that nobody else is paying attention to.
Are you speaking specifically of something?
No, I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking.
Brad, comments on that? Or did you have something similar?
It shows money, when you have just an astronomical amount of it, can get things done that couldn't happen before. And you mentioned how previous primaries just didn't go that way, and it's because Greg Abbott's $35 million war chest was not involved.
Oh, so I'll push back a little bit on that. I mean,
on your idea?
On my idea. No, on just because I'm not going to be naive and say that money doesn't matter or that it doesn't matter a lot. It does. I mean, certainly, but it's not just because you have the money. I mean, they went out and had a specific message and said, and not just that, but proved their case. I mean, they said, look, we're for this, we're for school choice or the border or whatever it was, and they demonstrated that the members that they were opposed to did not support those things while they were there. So it wasn't, I mean, I just find it very cynical to say, look, this guy's got a lot of money, and so that's why he can win, because there are billionaires on both sides, right?
Yeah,
and so there's a lot. I mean, we just talked about George Soros and all that, and the fact that he put a ton of money into Texas and was a complete failure. And so I think that for me, yes, there was money on both sides, but really they fought on issues, and people went out there and defended their records, and the voters decided, that's not what we want.
We also saw that a lot of these primaries become about anything but school choice in the messaging.
Yeah.
In the messaging sent to voters. Abbott's out there criticizing Republicans who voted with him on the border for not being with him on the border. Now, it worked incredibly well. And school choice was the reason that this happened. But the other factor is that Abbott just has the biggest persona in the state right now politically. So
he's the most
when I say the money,
because of the border.
yeah, right. Yeah. When I say the money's there too, but it's also Abbott himself throwing his weight around, which a lot of that is the money. So I didn't mean to be as reductive as just, he had a lot of cash, but it's clear he was, we'll get to this, the biggest, I would say, politician of the year because of that.
Yeah.
He realized the amount of power he has, and he threw it around. And
let's stay with you. Your biggest story of the year.
This biggest story of the year, I would say, dovetails with the primary. It's the speaker fight, and we have yet to see that come to a resolution. Obviously, things hit the fan over the weekend when we're talking right now. I don't know how it's going to end up. There's a lot of talk about neither candidate being able to get to 76 as things stand at the moment. We've seen both sides reach out to Democrats now because, of course, you have to, with the Republican caucus as divided as it is, you have to get Democratic support. And so we'll see how that plays out. But just the sheer amount of changes we saw, Phelan was dead after the primary. Then all of a sudden he's revived after the runoff.
And the good money was on him to win again, right?
Right. And, I think it was fair to think, well, he'll probably stick in his spot. Obviously things changed again. And maybe they change another time before we hit January 14th. But this thing is just ebbing and flowing constantly. It's kind of disorienting to keep up with. That's my job, so I got to do it.
Fine, I'll do it.
Derek, biggest story of the year.
The biggest story of the year, absent those that we already talked about, had to be, and specifically in the election arena, is the fact that the election wasn't closed in some places month or getting close to 2 months after the actual, ballot was actually finalized. I think you've seen a lot of, we go back to 2021. Obviously, there was a lot of buttoning up the electoral code in many states post-COVID. And you saw a lot of the blue states go in the other direction, like taking, allowing mail-in ballots to come in, however long later, so long if the date stamps within however many, days of the election itself. And you saw that they basically became pre-2000 Florida by doing that, right? Now we're all looking at, California and some of these, New York and some of these other states that took so long to count their own votes. We're looking at them like they're the clowns. And because counting votes is not hard, it's laborious, but like it's something that if you have process in place, like Texas, Florida, and many other states seem to be able to do it just perfectly fine. You have those processes in place, you don't allow too much wiggle room for shenanigans, and you can get everything done very quickly. But obviously the statement piece legislation that these other states had, it basically impaired their ability to count these quickly and effectively and such. Now there's a lot of people asking questions about the integrity of it. Now this isn't like a conspiracy or anything like that. I'm not saying, California is cooking the books after hours or anything like that. But I'm saying that normal people
do, but we know they do.
But I'm not saying that in case anybody, any litigious individuals are watching. But seriously though, now you look at them and you're just like, now reasonable people are going, if they can't even get this done in time, like what else aren't they doing?
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't think they cooked the books. I do think there's a bunch of crazy people out. There's definitely enough crazy people out in California to win elections. But are they still counting votes? I mean, I haven't followed it, but as like a week ago, they were still counting votes.
I think all races have been put to bed now, but only as of like a week or two ago.
Yeah. Does that surprise any of you that? And on that point, does that surprise any of you that that the election was called on the night of the election? I mean, I think everybody was thinking that, especially in places like Pennsylvania that were swing states, and they have a process where you're literally not allowed to count a single vote, even if it's come in early or absentee or whatever, until the moment the polls close.
The reason it went so fast is because the margin was so big. There was no dispute over, this county deciding with this chunk of votes deciding which way Georgia goes, So I think we would have seen at least some of that on election night had it actually been a closer race, and it just was not.
So I'll stay with that. Biggest surprise for you, Brad?
I would say Ted Cruz's margin in the state. He, polling was all over the place. I think we should give kudos to UT and the Texas Politics Project for, again, getting it pretty much right. They had +7 in their last poll before the election, and he ended up at, plus 8.6, I think. While all these other outlets had,
it's a 1 point race.
1 point to 3 point, 4 point. Going into the election, like a few days before, Cruz's team had themselves up 6. And Cruz outperformed that.
Yeah.
So that's pretty amazing to see, especially for a guy whose negatives are so high across many.
Did he win by double digits? I mean, depending on how you round up.
I think he won by 8.6%.
Okay, so it was not
but
those are 2 digits.
Yeah. Separated.
That's what my friends on the campaign would say.
Again, we don't do math in public.
Yeah, right.
But that to that point, that's twice now that it has looked really, really close. And then against Beto, it was, what was the issue? It was public safety, and it was the BLM stuff, right? And so like and being defund the cops, that's what it was.
Oh, yeah.
And they picked that up in like late August and September, and then that's really what drove and ultimately got Cruz across the finish line. This one, the same thing. They latched on to the boys and women's sports, and then really pushed that really hard as the single issue over the last 45 or 60 days.
And it worked across the country.
Yeah, and that got him way past the margin on that issue. I also thought Colin Allred's response, you and I both had the same reaction on Twitter. We were like, face to camera ad. It was like, as soon as you see a face to camera ad, you know that they know that they're in trouble.
I'm not a witch.
Yeah, I'm not a witch.
I wrote my newsletter that week on, basically the thesis was, this is how you know a punch landed.
Yeah.
He's got to get out and reply face to camera. Did he run that on the Dallas Cowboys game, I think?
Yeah.
Another disappointment.
Yeah. Just pile them on top of each other, right? It was a haymaker. And
especially because he was a football player, and then Cruz had that ad with this like shadowy monster football player going around, knocking girls down, and cheerleaders and lacrosse players and all this stuff. It was just too good.
Well, this is something Democrats are going to have to reckon with. I don't personally think Colin Allred wants that to be the case, but his party boxed him in with a vote that showed, made his record reflect that, and so. they're going to have to. We saw the Texas Democratic Party chair announce he's going to resign or retire. Mm-hmm. Which way are they going to go? Are they going to pivot back towards the middle, especially on issues like this? They can keep their position on abortion because it is popular among most voters, but this other stuff is not, and they need to recognize that. Otherwise, there's no hope for them to gain ground before redistricting.
What direction do you think they went?
Well, do I think they will go? I think it's pretty clear which way it's looking.
Which is crazy. I mean, that's the thing to me is like, you're right. I mean, the how many members of their party had to take this vote because they were being good soldiers, and then it all came back to bite them. I mean, I feel like, during the beginning of session, I guess, was it last year we had SB 12, what was the gender mod? Was that last year? SB 14. Yep. I mean, at the beginning of that debate, to anybody who listens, I'm like, is anybody really going to stand up in the Texas House of Representatives, or the Senate, and like advocate for this and like raise their hand and say, yes, I believe that 13-year-olds should be going through these procedures and we should let doctors be able to do this? It's like, is anybody really going to stand up? And they did, and I was just absolutely flabbergasted that the extreme part of their party would push their members to do that kind of thing, knowing like how this might play out in the election, in the electoral politics of it later on in the election. All right, so we are at biggest surprise for you.
Biggest surprise, I would have to say, and I was gonna go with the ticket splitting we saw, but we kind of covered that ground already. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go with the way that the college football playoff has actually kept things interesting, whereas all the prognostications was that it would make things worse.
I like it. Back to sports.
Yes, exactly. Well, you're not going to like it because you're probably going to have to play at Georgia a third time.
Yeah, that's true. But I agree. That's a big surprise that it actually kept it interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone's like, oh, rivalry week's not going to mean anything. I was like, we already discussed that, man. We're talking about planting flag legislation.
It always means something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why college football is college football, right?
Exactly. And so the way, and you would expect some growing pains. You'd expect some, the first year of it, like, I don't think anyone saw Boise State.
No.
Yeah, I think that was probably.
I hope he wins the Heisman. He better.
Yeah, I was about to say, Boise State, like, that could be the surprise of the year, but. Yeah. But notwithstanding is, I think the phase-in going from the 4 to the 12-team format, and the 12-team format I was always suspect, because I was like, we'll just go to the 16-team format. It'd be easy, right? And so I was like, there's no way that you could set up a 12-team format. I think it's made everything a lot more interesting in the last couple of weeks.
That's an interesting point about the Heisman, though, because usually the Heisman's won by the best player on one of the best teams that's like fighting for the. And this year it's probably going to be Travis Hunter, who's they're not even close. They're not in the playoffs. There was never even a consideration. I mean, they kind of had an outside chance to win the Big 12, but kind of blew that.
It reminds me of the year that RG3 won. Because they were like 9-3 Baylor, and so they weren't anything special, but they were solid. Yeah. And he just had outrageous numbers. And both the two guys, the front runners, Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty, have had insane numbers. Yeah. So frankly, it could go either way.
But at least the Boise State guy is in the playoffs, and they have a shot to make a run, right?
They're also, though, who knows how far they go, right? Yeah. But I mean, I'm rooting for them. I hope they make a run.
Did they already get through the first round?
So my biggest surprise was, and everybody will tell you that this wasn't a surprise. Everybody will say they predicted it, but Kamala getting switched onto the ticket, Biden dropping out, and Kamala becoming the nominee. I mean, a year ago, even 6 months before the election, I don't think anybody really would have dreamed, just from a logistical standpoint, like, how would this work? Like, how would it, everybody was saying, well, would you need to have a primary again? What happens to the money? I mean, everybody gave this money to the Biden campaign. I mean, I know Kamala's on the ticket, but everybody gave the money. What happens then? Where does the money go? And it just seemed like logistically, and then just sort of culturally, like, how would this even happen? And then it did, and it just happened. And then not only was he pushed out, but then he willingly went out and said, I'm going to get off the ticket. I think that's really shocking, and I think it sets a kind of a precedent, an unfortunate precedent, the way that they did it, that now, if they... because again, at the time we argued on the show, this wasn't. They're saying, Joe's too old and he can't do this anymore. It was because he wasn't going to win.
Yeah.
And so if that's the standard, which is we've gotten to June now, and it's clear that that the people picked the wrong nominee and we stand to lose. Well, now there's been a precedent set about how this gets done, and that's a legitimate justification for removing the democratically elected nominee.
My only pushback on that is that the guy, his brain's been pudding for like I'm not trying to be funny, but like he was non-compos mentis way back at the beginning of the year. I mean, Dean Phillips, another surprise or another politician in the year candidate. Dean Phillips was, jumped in, bought stock on that proposition. I think if you just have somebody who's showing down in the polls, like they're not going to play that playbook again for this very reason. I think their hands were pretty much forced because of, like, again, a second debate would have been catastrophic. I mean, the first one was catastrophic enough, but a second debate would have been the killing blow. President Trump could have, walked in there without pants on and just, did cartwheels, and people would be like, man, not necessarily my guy, but he seems like I'd want to have a beer with him.
Yeah.
Or, the separation from Biden and the Democrat Party had already begun at that point. Now they probably should have actually did the snap primary or something like that. I think in hindsight that would have, I don't think it would have changed the overall outcome, but I think it would have redounded to their benefit a little more. But I think that just the what we've seen from this particular example, I don't think that playbook will probably ran.
Well, and Biden kind of gave him the bird on the way out because they were trying to do a snap primary, and then he's like, nope, I'm going to endorse Kamala. Guess what? You're stuck with her. So that's amazing. I actually have a different take on this. I saw
I'll allow it.
Okay. I saw the swap as, obviously they did it because they felt like they had to in order to win. So motivations aside, it was the party reasserting itself in an era when the parties they don't mean nothing, but they mean close to nothing.
Fair.
They're just glorified fundraising apparatuses for these candidates, and different people have different philosophical opinions on this, but I think parties, they have a right to determine who runs under their umbrella, and if they deem a candidate unworthy of that, they're a check on voters, just like voters are a check on them. And so this was I thought an interesting example of checks and balances playing out in the political sphere. Motivations, obviously aside, but that's how I read it.
I have some friends that are deep in the swamp in D.C. who are still just absolutely livid at the decision for the campaign to do the debate so early, right? Almost because because they believe that it was forced on them or was pushed because that was the moment that the whole world was going to see that Biden wasn't ready and that he had deteriorated. That if they had waited, I mean now they're not mad
if that would have happened in September, October though.
That's what their point is. Their point is if that had happened in September, there would have been no way to get Kamala. I mean, of course, they're making this argument in September,
and then it would have been a 10-point drubbing.
That's what. That's what he's saying is that like this allowed them by the campaign agreeing to do the debate so early. This allowed them to then make a switch that then gave them a shot at winning. What he's saying is we should have done the debate in September. That would have been obvious then, and we'd have had all the problems. But it would have been too late for them to switch. It would have would obviously have been given them the win. Now, all things being equal, he had a landslide victory anyway. So now I'm like, hey man, chill out. You don't have to get so mad about it.
I think in hindsight, we all thought this at the moment, but hindsight proves it true that Trump won when he did not get assassinated, when he escaped that very narrowly, and he held up his fist, and that viral picture went out. I mean, they switched candidates because they thought this is what's going to give us a chance. Yeah, and she still got destroyed.
Yeah, and then and that was the moment you sort of get the Elon Musk and the tech bros all moving that direction, and then the podcast and everybody with Joe Rogan. That was really the moment that certainly the momentum kind of shifted. Okay, so we'll go into politician of the year. I had Greg Abbott, you had Greg Abbott, so I'll let you make the case.
It's just this year proved Abbott is not just the top politician in the state nominally as the governor, but he has the most oomph behind him. And we talked about the money. We talked about his reputation among voters. He's just the biggest force in the state. And if that wasn't clear before this year, it's painfully clear now. Like you just can't avoid it, right? And so that's going to determine a lot going forward. The talk about whether the votes are there for school choice in the legislature next year, it depends on what we're talking about, right, in terms of the blueprint. But there's a lot of voters who are determined to do that, and they owe Greg Abbott one, so they're gonna, whether they like it or not, as a matter of policy, they're gonna go his way. And maybe he turns that into another issue down the road, because God knows he is at least considering running for president in 2028.
Yeah, I'm curious, especially now that things have changed, and I forget how many are left in the House that voted for the Herrera amendment, but it's less than 10, I think. And so, at a time when there were,
and 2 of those have come out and said that they're for school choice now.
That they're going to switch?
Yeah.
And it's like, even let's say that because again, there's nothing, even with the votes and all of that, there's nothing guaranteeing that school choice gets through. Maybe it gets watered down, and so then you have conservatives now don't support that particular bill. So there's all kinds of things that can happen that don't guarantee that a strong school choice bill gets passed. My question is, do you really want to run this back? I mean, I don't think that Abbott, this was just a 3-year or 4-year project for him. I think if school choice for some reason doesn't get through next legislative session, I think he'll be right there again, except instead of having 16 targets, he'll have 8 or 7, and maybe even 5. And, again, with the war chest and being popular and this issue being supported by the vast majority of Republicans, you only have 5 people that you're not. I mean, do you really want to run that playbook again with a guy who is, who's feeling the wind in his sails and already has a huge, 2 major victories in the political realm, in this last election? So
the only difference is Abbott will be on the ballot himself in 26, right?
Which
this year, he was all full speed ahead on everything.
Which means if you thought he spent some money when he wasn't on the ballot, and now he's going to be really spending some money. I'm just
coattails because of that. Though.
Yeah. Anything on Abbott before we get to your choice?
No. To be honest with you, that Abbott was my choice as well, and I had Dean Phillips as my reserve fallback that no one else will take, and both of them got put out there. So I'm actually going to go with Ron DeSantis, because one of the ways I've heard Florida politics described is it is basically a very ministerial, the governor of Florida is a very ministerial position. He doesn't have a lot of the soft power. We always talk about the lieutenant governor in Texas having the more powerful position, but the governor himself has a lot of soft power if we look at things in an institutional political way. And there's less of that in Florida. In Florida, it's much more of an administrative, almost a bureaucratic position. And the one thing you have to get right is make sure the tourists keep coming and respond to hurricanes. And obviously, the tourists are fine in Florida, but they obviously got absolutely walloped by hurricane this year. And the response from Governor DeSantis in that particular time, I think, checked that box for, most Floridians. And, obviously, this is not to say, Florida's a better state than Texas. I wouldn't say that at all. But I think that if you have a unique item there, it'd be like handling our grid or our energy policy broadly when it comes to energy production. There's that one box that needs to be checked for any politician to be successful. And I think that was successfully checked in Florida as it is checked in Texas.
That's a good one. Good surprise. Good twist.
Yeah.
All right.
So Dean Phillips?
For our last category be Texan of the Year. I already mentioned him once, but I'm going to go with Joe Rogan. I don't know if he would consider himself to be a Texan, but since I had Greg Abbott already as politician, I had to go in a different direction. So I don't know if he considers himself to be a Texan yet, although he does brag a lot about and he lauds Austin and being in Texas and all of that.
Have you been to his club yet?
I've not been to the club yet.
Okay.
I don't get to stay out that late anymore when having a 2-year-old at home.
You don't want to be out on 6 that late anyway.
Yeah.
But certainly I think what he has created here in Austin and created just amongst the sort of culture and community of comics, it's funny. We're all looking to comics now to tell the truth about the way the world works. I mean, it's not pundits or politicians or lawmakers anymore. It's like send in the clowns, right? And they're actually telling. And so I think there's a lot of what he has done has created that. Also, his obviously his incredibly wildly popular podcast, and it's not just him bringing his friends on with comedians and all that, which is fun to listen to. But I mean, he's bringing astrophysicists and people that are having these really deep conversations.
Presidential candidate.
And then as we got closer into the these things that really matter, he was bringing in presidential candidates, and then J.D. Vance multiple times, and then other folks to come in and talk. I think Tulsi Gabbard was on there while she was still in the primary, and so I think he's created something outside of what his expectations were for his podcast. And frankly, I think, and I've mentioned this maybe once or twice on the podcast, is I think that's the direction that media is going to go now. I consider maybe your thoughts on this. You guys have done a lot to invest in new newsletters and new podcasts in order to get information. Don't just come to my website and read my story. Yeah. You guys are actively going out and creating new products to get to people, because you see, like everybody else, the way that people are consuming media now is not just going to the Dallas Morning News and getting fed whatever they decided was important that day, but actually listening to a discussion, maybe a 3-hour discussion with somebody you don't agree with, so he's had atheists on explaining those kinds. So it's just, I think that's where people are going to start getting their information more and more from, and he's really been kind of the centerpiece of that, certainly through COVID and on. So I'd be interested in your take on the media apparatus.
Yeah, I mean, people increasingly want, maybe it's always been this way, I don't know, but they want analysis, and analysis that is honest. That's one big reason why we introduced the new newsletters. Mine is Insider Baseball, Texas Politics, but we have other categories for anyone that has other interests, right? And the itch can only be scratched so much with just basic reporting. There are people that want that, a lot of people that find it useful, but having that extra bit of insight, I think, and this is the reaction I've gotten from people responding to our stuff, is that it's connecting dots they didn't see before. And part of that is because, for me, I cover the building very closely. I see it every day. I talk to people in there every day. The average person just can't do that. They have their own life to live. And so Joe Rogan does a similar thing on a much bigger scale, right? And undoubtedly he's the king of podcasts, and he's changed the game entirely. But he's bringing these experts in. I usually hate using the word expert. It's just it's used just carte blanche.
You're sitting in a think tank. Yeah, it's fine.
Right.
It's fine.
But he brings these people in that know a lot about the topic they're discussing, and that is a way. If someone follows his podcast, they know. I may not be totally interested in whatever astrophysics or whatever, but the person that he's going to bring on and talk to is going to be very interesting, and I'm going to learn a lot.
Or moon landing conspiracy theories.
Yes, that too.
That was a great show.
Well, on that note, though, I think one of the best episodes he had, and I'm not a regular listener, but I did catch this one, is he had Terrence Howard, the actor, come in, who has an interesting theory on supersymmetry. I would say he probably has the most robust theory on supersymmetry that any actor has. I'm willing to concede that. But then he brought on a Harvard mathematician to debate, like basically, okay, break the pool cue,
crazy.
Go. And that's, to Brad's point, that's what people are looking for, not because they want to see high-minded ideas as a blood sport, but they're like, no, if you defend yourself against this professional in this sphere, and then you, professional, if you can't ration with every guy on the street, like, do you even believe your own stuff?
Yeah.
And so I think that really does contribute, and Joe Rogan is to be praised for that.
Yeah,
it does contribute to the discourse.
And I think that kind of discourse is going to replace presidential debates. I think that people only watch, the only people who watch those things are the people who already have a jersey on, and all we want to see is our guy beat the other guy up, just like any other kind of sport. And so they're not serving the function that they should serve in a democracy. But meanwhile, programs like his and others, I mean, there's a lot of others. There's at least a dozen others that are doing really good jobs at that.
Basically, it's a return to Lincoln Douglas debates,
right?
And it may not be a debate in name, but you're getting long, drawn-out thoughts from people you wouldn't get in just 30-second snippets in a debate.
Yeah. Can we put this on the Chiron Jefferson when we edit it? It was Brad Johnson. Talk Tua is actually a return to the Lincoln Douglas debates.
On that note, we'll stay with Derek on your Texan of the year.
Well, if you say Rogan, and you've already talked about Governor Abbott, you got to go with Elon. I think that his unabashed embrace of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. I don't think I don't think there's any monocausal explanation for what happened this year. But I think that was a large contributing factor. Because, obviously Elon's persona non grata on the left now, well, probably was since we took over Twitter, or X as they call it.
Dumb name.
Yeah,
dumb name.
You know what? I don't deem
he can name it whatever he wants, but it's still a dumb name.
You can't call him Texan of the year and then insult him when they say it.
I would just like to point that out, Elon. That was Brad Johnson of the Texans saying that.
He probably
my
already
blue
knows.
check's going to be taken away now.
Yeah. But no, I mean that seriously. So he was obviously treading in that direction. Now, I mean, I think if you just look at him and what he says publicly, you wouldn't say, "Oh, this is a Buckley conservative," right? Like he's not. He's definitely not an individual who. Was forged in the crucible of Goldwater and all these other individuals that we speak of. But it's more of an edification of just, hey, maybe we should stop doing this ridiculous thing that we always have to do just because, my previous team, the blue team, said that that's what we have to do, whether it's men and women's sports, whether it's border insanity, whether it's the high taxation over in California that actually drove him here. All that stuff goes, hey, these are not like none of this is fait accompli. We can push back on this. We can change this. And look, if the red jersey people are more in my camp on this. And again, he's not a conservative, but it does represent more of a larger chunk of society than I think the blue team is given credit for.
And I think one thing you haven't mentioned, which is super significant, is his purchase of Twitter. I mean, if you talk to any of these free speech advocates, I mean, there's I guess it was Mike Benz, who used to work at the State Department, cybersecurity, whatever, was on Rogan the other day, basically saying, look, the way this was moving was censorship of all social media. This is censorship of any kind of discussion that we don't like or any points we don't like. Him going in and buying Twitter stopped a lot of that in its tracks. And so that, I mean,
have you been on Blue Sky yet?
I'm very little.
It's if you want to see like a true like blue-pilled echo chamber, it is.
Well, maybe I should go. Maybe
that is
like
my holiday recommendation.
When I watch MSNBC, it's kind of the same thing.
Oh, it's far more virulent.
All right, Brad. Thoughts on Elon or Texan of the Year?
I'll start with that. While I don't like the name, I think it is commendable what he did buying Twitter, and something he's probably going to take a pretty big loss on. I mean, you just can't really make money with it. It's very difficult. Maybe he does it. But I think this points to a broader topic of Trump's biggest legacy for the Republican Party is expanding the tent so much. And part of that is Elon. We saw it first in 2016 with all these voters who hadn't cast the ballot in years. Now it's these people who are, in a lot of their politics on the left, bringing them in. Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr.,
Yeah, you said, and to interrupt, and I want to get to your Texan of the Year, but, Rogan said, some guy went on MSNBC and said, we need our own, podcast bros, and we need, our own set of people that can influence, the young men.
Only we had lefty podcasters.
And Rogan was like, you had me. What are you talking about? I was in your camp for 10 years. Well, you had Rogan. Like, it's insane. So anyway, I thought that was a really good point. All right, your Texan of the Year.
I'm going to throw a curveball and go with Jerry Jones.
Whoa.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And
this is the most we've ever talked about Jerry Jones on the pod.
Did break a pool cue.
And here is my reasoning.
And you're getting both of them?
Yeah, right.
He has driven my Cowboy fan friends so nuts that they have stopped watching the games. And I must say, I love it. Also, he has cemented the Detroit Lions as America's team. And so I almost went with Motor City Dan Campbell, went to Glen Rose High School.
Texas A&M, great.
Yeah, but I decided to go with Jerry. Jera, because of his effect on the broader discourse of America and its football team.
I mean, the way that the Lions went into Texas Stadium and just absolutely embarrassed the Cowboys. I mean, you should take a victory lap for that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it gave Chris Christie didn't like that too much. I don't know if you guys remember that. I was in Dallas 2 days after that happened, and that was when Jerry had the meltdown on the radio show, and it's just.
Inject that right into my veins.
Well,
Yes,
we're almost out of time. We've taken I believe we've taken the full hour. So we're going to skip most of our other things that we normally do because this was a great discussion. I do want to get your thoughts on what's next, like what to watch for. We're going into after the new year. We obviously have session, those kinds of things. Brad, any thoughts on what to watch for, what's coming up, and what people should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the two big things are the speaker fight and then school choice, how that plays out. But the thing I'm watching most is the budget. And because we've seen a lot of these, especially on the conservative side, these marquee bills passed, the battleground, I think, is going to move towards things like water, other infrastructure. The state is booming in population, and they have to prepare for that to some degree. And so that's going to cost money. So where do these fights unfold, especially in the budget, on building new water sources, desalinations? That is something we introduce. The power grid still is a thing, right? Now we see nuclear coming up as such a significant talking point. Road congestion, simple things like that, basic functions of government. I think we're going to see a pivot back to that just because they have to. You know, take school choice off the table. Like that's a top level theme to watch, of course. But on all this other stuff, something's got to be done, and they've been kicking the can down the road for a long time. So I don't know what they're going to do, but it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Now Texas is busting at the seams, you know, for good reasons, right? But you're right. We still got to fill potholes. We still got to make the lights come on, and we still got to make sure there's clean water coming out of the faucet.
The prosperity is great, but as with everything, it comes with trade-offs, right?
1,000 people moving here a day, none of them bring water with them.
Nope.
Yeah, right. And that's what's true. I mean, Texas is so big, there's like large regions that have a lot of water and then other large regions that don't have any water. So I'll go next, and I'll say, how quickly does Abbott move into emergency session? Because I know that there's always some prognostication that he could do it as soon as, sometime in January, especially if it's an issue like school choice that he wants to move fast on. But then other times he's waited until the state of the state, and that's really when he's made the call and all of that. And so I think that'll give us an indication on kind of where he thinks the politics and policies are on moving, for assuming that school choice is going to be an emergency item, and then really to see what other things are in the emergency items. That's always a big moment that kind of kick off, really kick off session. Even though we start late this year too, right?
January
next
14th.
year. That's late as I
a couple days after. I think it was January 12th.
Which means that's going to push Sine Die past Memorial Day, which usually it's the weekend of Memorial Day when we have that. Yeah. So it's going to be deep into June this year. So things will be a little bit different. All right. So close us out. What to watch for, Derek?
I'm really interested in, obviously a shameless plug here, but I'm really interested in I would say if and how the casino fight reinvigorates itself. We obviously saw the record amount of spending. We also saw a lot of spending on causes and individuals on the right from gambling interests. And, Brad and I are both from Ohio, and we both saw the casinos get legalized there. Well, legalized in 2009, start cropping up in 2012. And, it's been a mixed bag at best, depending on who you ask. And so as that debate comes back around, we're going to see a lot more. I mean, there's obviously a lot more support for it. I think we're on some 90 some odd, government code 305 lobbyists registered with the Ethics Commission alone.
I think it's more than that. But
yeah. To be fair, I only checked like a few weeks ago, which it probably is more than that now. And I think when it comes back around, we're going to see the same, Goddard-Dameron, fight that we saw before. But now that there's fewer things on the table, you don't have SB 14 taking away from this. Hopefully you won't have school choice drawing a lot of energy from that because it gets passed so early. That I think that it's going to have a much bigger center ring in the circus this time.
Brad, on gambling, I mean, do you think they're definitely playing the long game here. Do you think do you think they're just still in the middle of the long game, or do you think this is a session that they're expecting some results?
Much like the Democrats are trying to set the table for them to have a successful 2031 for redistricting, I think the gambling lobby knows it's not passing anything this year. It's not passing anything as long as Dan Patrick is lieutenant governor. And it
didn't pass the House, though, last time.
Right. So that's the first hurdle they got to get. And I don't think they have the votes for it there this time, but I guess we'll see, right? But it's not just Dan Patrick himself that's opposed to this. It's the Senate. And Dan Patrick's just the face of that, and he's falling on his sword for his members, saying, no, we're not doing this. I think he probably isn't a fan of it either, but it's not just him. And so they're throwing all this money at the wall constantly. It's basically just like World War I trench warfare, a constant barrage, gain an inch, gain an inch, gain an inch, gain an inch. And they've gained some inches, but they're not anywhere close to securing a victory.
I don't think they're going to pass anything as long as they keep running those terrible television advertisements. I mean, absolutely cheesy and abysmal. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We're kind of running out of time, so I really appreciate your thoughts. This is one of our favorite shows. I think maybe next year we'll dress up in like tuxes or something, maybe sort of a New Year's vibe, and like set off some streamers or whatever.
A top hat and a monocle.
Yeah, there we go.
Real cartoony with it.
Yeah.
We should have had that for the biggest surprise. Remember we did when you were at the convention, We kept saying, joining us next will be Brad Johnson. Joining us next will be Brad Johnson. The biggest surprise is he joined us.
He actually showed up
I'm back.
when we were here. So thank you, Brad. We will make this a yearly thing, so we appreciate your support and obviously wish you well and your organization for all the good things that you do. Derek, it's been a great year.
Absolutely.
One down, and I guess we're going to start season 3 of the podcast next year, and maybe we might have a more frequent weekly podcast again, since there'll be so much to talk about every single week. So appreciate you doing this with me, and appreciate you for being here, Brad.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And appreciate you for listening and for watching. And as we like to say at the end of all of our podcasts, in the famous words of Sam Houston that I always forget, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.